Welcome, everyone, to Buying Local. I'm your host, Mike Nelson from Five Towers Media. Before I introduce our guests, I should say that we're in a little bit of a different location today, so the audio is going to sound a little more echoey, I think. I can already kind of hear it coming through, so if that bothers you, apologize about that. But we are actually, our community partner, Surround Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning, is hard at work on a 100-degree day. I still can't believe they showed up in this heat. Thank you guys so much. Thanks to the guys that are out there right now doing the work that are fixing our air conditioning. So very much needed on a day like today. So thank you to Cerrone and everything you guys do. Appreciate it. So we're joined today by Bill Teator. Bill, I'm not even going to introduce what you do or who you are. I'm going to let you do that because, as we were talking right before we started recording, you're a man about town, so to speak, right? As the saying goes, you've been around the community and in different different roles and different activities, and but very much, from what I've seen over the last few years working with you, just very civically minded, and I would say an all-around pretty good human. I'm not saying that because we're recording. I do mean that. That's what I say about you when you're not around. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bill, tell us, kind of maybe step into like what you're currently doing, and then we can kind of backfill some of your other experience.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for having me. Really enjoy working with you and your team. It's great to have people that are just so responsive and talented and mission oriented.
Thank you.
And so that does back into a little bit of like the way I try to look at the world or how to make an impact on it. And, thanks for the compliment. But we're always striving to be our best and better. And I'm certainly always working on it. It's a daily process, right?
Same.
So currently executive director for the campaign for Saratoga 250. It's a nonprofit 501c3 that we're dedicated to educating, promoting, and preserving the heritage that is of Saratoga's legacy as America's turning point in the battles of Saratoga during our revolution. Certainly, we want to bring to this next generation, and by that we mean at least 50 more years. We're approaching the 250th anniversary of that incredibly important, one of the top battle outcomes in world history, that it really did turn our revolution in favor of actually having the opportunity to live under, the Constitution and the freedoms we enjoy today. And that happened right here in our backyard. So we really want to revive that awareness among many people of diverse points of view and backgrounds for another 50 plus years. When we look back at how it's been done in the past, there's been incredible impacts. And to the County of Saratoga's credit and its Saratoga 250 Commission, who we work very closely with, they saw this coming and in 2021 made this a huge priority, chartered this 250th Commission with 13 appointed members. All of us are very fortunate to have the county historian, Lauren Roberts, chairing that effort. She's an incredible resource, incredible talent. More and more folks will see that. We're really hopeful of, and already are seeing that all over the Eastern Seaboard. She's been carrying the banner for Saratoga these last several years already, ramping up well in advance of 2027 and our 250th. And to put a little cap on this opening statement, I mean, we really, thanks to that leadership from county leaders at the Board of Supervisors, the administrator, Steve Bulger, to Lauren and team at the commission, and what we can amplify as a community-minded nonprofit is putting Saratoga at the forefront of these 250th commemorations that I think the general public is really starting to see seeping through from our friends in New England, be it the Boston Tea Party all the way back now in December 2023. We were there in Faneuil Hall. Members of our board, members of our living history community from right here in Saratoga were active at the Bunker Hill celebration when we're recording here today. It was just 2 days ago. So we had very prominent Saratoga figures represented, both participating in the full battle reenactment and a couple of our board members there observing and interviewing people. So we've been active based on that leadership shown by Saratoga County that we're not interested in being an afterthought next to the major, quote unquote, major metros of the founding and currently like Boston or Philadelphia. Virginia is amazing. They all do amazing jobs with their heritage. So if nothing else, we're inspired by it. And we want Saratoga, due to the impact it really authentically had, to be right there in the forefront of these 250th anniversary celebrations. That's our goal.
You know, it's interesting too, because I got educated working with you, right? So, because prior to this, I didn't realize what an effect the Battle of Saratoga had on the world, to your point from what you said earlier, right? Like not just the war, but like the overreaching implications of that battle and the outcome, and how important it was. And it's fascinating that I've been living here for 20 years, right? And the battlefield, which I, of course, have been to. I think probably most people have at some point.
Sure.
But you still don't understand the significance of what it meant to the country, the founding. Or, and then you see the monument over, I go apple picking and you can't miss the monument, right?
Correct.
So
That's
it's
a
over
great
at
spot.
Saratoga Apple, right? So it's, it's been fascinating. It's been such a great learning experience and really getting into all the details of it and learning more about it. So I think I think it should be up there, right?
Exactly.
With the Tea Party and things that I, remember from grade school and learning about and stuff. But
just to piggyback on that a second, I'd love to park getting into how we make the connection for this next 50 years in a 21st century digital age. And we can come back to that. But just in terms of the actual impact, why Saratoga in the Western world is first known, and we love our racetrack and we love our spas and we love the quality of life that we've seen here, thanks to many generations. But it really all springboards, in the Western world, if you will, from that turning point victory in 1777. And literally, you can read real primary source material of the diplomats, Ben Franklin, prominently among them, having been in France for some time, trying to develop this global alliance for an upstart, nascent group of genuinely revolutionaries.
Yeah.
Like we all hear these phrases, and maybe too many think of it as like a cliche, but this was genuinely, exceptionally true, that they were revolutionaries. There was no model necessarily. They were taking the best of whatever models they could read and glean from, which they were very deep thinkers, our founders, who declared their independence. But battle here at Saratoga, that victory and the news that took time to travel, but its arrival, the impact it has to cement a global power to join this nascent upstart nation is you don't even have to imagine it. When you think about it and read some of that material that way, you realize, this really changed the direction of the world. There were two global empires who were neighbors along, conflicting, Britain and French. But there were others, the Dutch, the Netherlands, came into our fold and lending financial resources. And John Adams was over there. And, we had essentially a global conflict by proxy playing out right here in America. But many, many centuries now, a couple of centuries plus, 2.5 centuries later, you still see throughout all of those times, historians ranking these battles and the victory here among the top 10 or 15 in global human history for a reason, because it did develop a nation. America led to the development of our nation, which, genuinely is exceptional. We are always working to improve within the confines that thankfully we're set up to amend and allow ourselves to evolve. But it genuinely was a balanced foundation with checks and balances and systems that were preserving the individual as the sovereign, not a monarch and not another, sort of form of government. This was genuinely revolutionary. And God willing, we have another 250 plus years. But at minimum, we're trying to tell the story of our component in that founding, and hopefully inspire another 50 years worth of not just regional and local, but worldwide audiences. That Saratoga really was instrumental to this. And in addition to all these other amazing hospitality amenities we do genuinely have here, come here and dig into our heritage, because it's deep.
It's deep, and what I've come to learn, a large part of the reason why we were victorious and the framers were able to build a system of government in our constitutional republic that, I think it's inarguable, right? That we have become one of the greatest nations in the world, certainly one of the most powerful, most wealthy nations on the planet. And it started with those guys and girls, for that matter.
People taking risks. Of all walks of life. And there's some great elements that part of this connection to another, 50 years of Americans. The nation does continue to evolve, and there are very, very diverse backgrounds. But there were then, even.
Yeah.
And some of what we really intend to intentionally bring forward and reveal are, there were freed black men at the battle in the ranks. It was an integrated army. There was, a nation. Oneida Nation was our first ally before what we were just talking about, France and some of these other global powers. A very important ally because of knowledge of the landscape and networks, across the Northern Campaign as it was known in 1777, which, culminated with that enormous victory here in Saratoga. Native allies were, they were on both sides from various nations, but Oneidas and among others were our ally. So there was a really eclectic mix. And then some other things that have been incredible to me to learn from these historians we work with is encampments, like the encamped civilians that were traveling with the British forces, which included Germans, hired Hessians and their families. And there's an incredible story of the Baroness. The Baroness was the wife of the German general in the forces of General Burgoyne, and she had 3 children under 5 years old, encamped behind the lines, essentially all the way from Canada down to Saratoga in the wilderness of that day, and ends up in the battle, under fire, trying to care for wounded officers with 3 toddlers and basically an infant and 2 toddlers, like more or less.
That's wild.
And then taken prisoner, and she does recount the reason we know all this. She was writing home to her family in Germany, her mother, not only that whole campaign until she was ended up being captured, but then as 7 years a prisoner of war. So she was traveling
7 years.
From 1777 Saratoga until the formal treaty end of the war in 1783. Much of what was known as the Convention Army, a lot of Burgoyne's regulars, including, in this case, a German family and, a mercenary, if you will, Hessians, were prisoners of war. So she was marched to Boston. They end up all the way in Charlottesville, Virginia at the end. But she was diarying in a way, like writing home, and Lauren likes to describe it as, it's one of the first examples of a female war correspondent. She essentially was writing what she's seeing firsthand. And, I don't know the backstory enough to understand why her family in Germany, thank God they did, kept it for centuries.
Yeah.
But there's this great, essentially firsthand account of Saratoga, of the whole run up, Canada, what they expected, how they were moving, some of the dire circumstances that clearly set in. Really concerns and worries about, wow, we're undergone and surrounded, and rations are starting to be limited, and wounded are coming in, including General Simon Fraser dies on essentially a table like we're sitting at in the middle of a house called the Marshall House. It still exists today. It's one of the few from this era that still exists in Saratoga County, privately owned. But there's a cannonball in the rafters, in the cellar of that building that she was sheltering under, and others. So we have, really living, breathing history, if you will. Yeah. That was firsthand preserved, thankfully. And that kind of stuff is what we realize we can bring out to really connect and relate to people. We read and see and listen to podcasts about all kinds of current events, and a lot of us can get into the drama of the conflicts that are unfolding. Understandably, there's actually a lot you can look at right in our backyard from our own founding history that can help you understand the real stakes of conflict, or the real impacts on humans that are not maybe making the decisions but get caught in the crossfire. Yeah,
it's and I do feel like I know that the campaign for Saratoga, I know that you guys, as you're working to tell this story and get more content out, I do feel like you've done a really good job of telling all points of view from all walks of life. Because, it's easy to just think of the Revolutionary War and think about a bunch of guys in wigs, right? It's very, very easy to do that. But there's so many stories that are, not just from men in wigs, but from the women that were involved in battles and supporting, and from the other, like you said, the forces that are joining us and the other side. And there's just so many different stories there to tell, and it's so fascinating and interesting.
Exactly.
And including, we segue into Overhearing History, of showing that Revolutionary War from a child's eyes.
Exactly. No, we're really excited about that. Again, this is just a great example of how we do want to continue to figure out how do we reach the 21st century audience. But sometimes you can reach in legacy format, so to speak. So this is essentially a short graphic novel, Overhearing History, with really vivid illustrations told through the protagonist lens of a 12-year-old boy named Nathaniel. This was a concept that was chartered by the Saratoga 250 Commission and Ann Clothier, an incredible historian and a great writer who came up with the written concept alongside Alex Portal, who had brought forward the notion. He's a freelance illustrator and an author, writer, but he had done some illustration in other states throughout his career that reached, in a cause-based way, could reach audiences when you had a priority to reach families with children. So they ran with it, created this. Our nonprofit partnership with the county, we were paying attention to what they were unearthing as a new way to connect with a priority audience, families with children. And we're absolutely stepped forward to publish it. And obviously we enjoyed working, your digital agency has been great in terms of design. So we were able to get that prepped for print and release electronically. It's available now, Overhearing History.
I did just order 2 copies, by the way.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. So we're electronic ebook and print and mail right to your house in a handful of days or delivered to your house from Kindle. But we're excited to have local partners. We do believe that we'll be able to have it on release for retail and Impressions of Saratoga and Northshire Bookstore, great independent bookstore.
Absolutely.
And other locations, like we're talking with preservation and museums, again, one of our goals, not to digress too far, I definitely want to come back to this story.
That's what podcasts are for.
Yeah, but I'm making on my own mental notes, so I don't go too far off track, but I will definitely come back to Overhearing History. But, one minor point was we are partnering all the time intentionally with not only hospitality locations to really bundle, hey, you can, come here and have a great time, have great food, stay in amazing places, take hikes and do wellness retreats or whatever's your thing, and you can still consume some really incredible heritage. So part of that is, we are intentionally, as we do this and hopefully expand on the interest, of folks visiting Saratoga or living here in our own region, wanting to explore these locations, we'll surface places like the Brookside, Saratoga County's History Center right in the middle of, beautiful Boston Spa Village. You can walk and go to great meals and everything else down there and go to a really incredible, museum that's got a great piece of Saratoga.
Downtown Boston Spa.
They do.
Yeah.
So, there's a place. Grant's Cottage, different era of history, but completely on genre, if you will, of American history. It's pretty darn steeped in our backyard, and many, many others. So we're going to bring forward other partners to really round out that heritage-based experience you can have in our region. But I only bring that up in the context of talking about this, young 8 to 12-year-old reader, really vivid, short graphic novel, because we'll release it with partners like that. If they're interested in carrying it on consignment, we're cause-based. So yes, we got to pay the bills, but that's not maybe our primary motivation. Our motivation is educate, promote, preserve this history, and among those audiences, tier 1A, if you will. We're in horse racing country, like the 1A of 2 number ones, let's say, is families with children. So that's really the motive of Overhearing History, and putting it in the lens of this 12-year-old boy, Nathaniel, who's amongst his parents, obviously, and in this case, they live and operate a tavern, which was common where a lot of debate may happen, even today, but certainly was a lot of where our founding was rooted in debate in taverns. So he's overhearing, literally, history, and the era that this first book is intended to be a series that Ann and Alex portray is an important one, talking about making sure we bring forward not just the after, like with hindsight. Everybody thinks they're a patriot, right? And we all hope that we would be, or maybe a lot of us hope that we would have been. But there's loyalists and patriots really struggling with this in the era of this first series of Overhearing History, 1775 setting. Lexington and Concord had just happened, east of here in New England, and as that news travels in the 18th century time frame, a little slowly, but it starts really picking up. And there had been, various leaders from every community writing to each other about rebelling or not. This is essentially a civil war style debate.
Yeah.
Neighbor versus neighbor, family members divided. So elements of that come out in this first series. And then Nathaniel's hearing it from different points of view, obviously in his own household, from a grandfather or an older elder, if you will, who had been in the French and Indian War. So, certainly had a strong point of view about the British, to natives and others. So that's the goal, really, is to educate through edutainment. So it is vivid, it is fun, it's a short read, but you could certainly read it with your parent or grandparents. A great gift idea if you want to sort of spark that interest in heritage or history with somebody in your family. That's what it's designed for, and we will make it available to community libraries, certainly starting in Saratoga County, but anybody in our adjoining region. It is, we want to lift all tides should rise with this effort as well.
Yeah.
We do have so much deep history in the whole greater capital region, from the Adirondacks through Albany down to the Hudson Valley. So yeah, any folks can reach out to us about it, but we absolutely want to make sure every community library and certainly school libraries and homeschool networks, are aware of this and start, hopefully, if they're able to, order, but we'll at least get a handful of free copies out into any library we can reach. So.
Oh, it's awesome. I thought it was really well done.
Thank you.
I do, not saying just because we had a hand in it, but I do think that Anne and Alex did a great job with the work that they did. It's easy to read, right? Like, it's a nice story. I think I think it's on point with going to that audience, because there's from an adult audience standpoint, it's pretty easy for us to go out and find a book on the Revolutionary War and even more so on, the battles of Saratoga. But from a children's perspective, it's a lot harder to find that content out there. So I thought it was really a great idea to put something out for that market.
Yeah. Again, it's a credit. It's really a cool orbit that we have going on intentionally. Again, led with the commission, sort of the subject matter experts, right? But also with a great eye and a vision on what we really want to use this 250th commemoration to catalyze. And it's fun to come alongside it as a nonprofit with a great group of board members, a great group of donors. We have Victory Circle founding donors and, really an incredible public-private collaboration going on. And like I said, this whole other orbit, we just see will continue to expand. We're working really well with Discover Saratoga because of that holistic, heritage and tourism opportunity. Those other museums and heritage locations that we can draw in. And we really intend to reach these different audiences with, a lot of the greats. You got to put the steak and potatoes out there, right? The known names. And it is a big military endeavor, but there's so many other incredible elements we're just starting to peel the onion back on. That may really be the thing that somebody listening or somebody wanting to bring their family out, latches onto. And it was like, oh yeah, I never really thought about how those folks would have been impacted. Or why did they line up this way or on that side? And those things shift and change, as conflict goes on too. So media that we can use, we're using here, in this case, a legacy book, but it is available on ebook.
Right, yeah.
It can be delivered right to your house in a handful of days. We're using a lot of video, across all social media platforms. We are present, for your audience on the usual Facebooks and Instagram. Again, pretty much split for different sort of age demographics these days. But again, we don't want to leave anybody behind. We may have like 1A and one goal, number one audience goals, in order to create longevity, 50-year plus of memory of what we're talking about. But we really want anybody interested in consuming this to have access to it. So we're on Facebook, Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're building our video assets in a great YouTube channel.
Nice.
Again, we probably have I think we're probably up to like 18 videos in there of various length. But our kickoff video, which, I kind of dub Our Turn, is really a great one to go look for and watch if you just go to Saratoga 250 on any of these channels, but on YouTube, and you look at you just use your little filter for the most viewed. I think we're at 7,000+ views on this one. For us, that's a
awesome.
pretty good deal.
Yeah, for local market, absolutely.
Yeah, and it really is intentionally the whole story we've just been talking about, why this mattered, what the stakes were. This was not a fait accompli, especially at that point when we were heading in 1777. Like, liberty was fading potentially. We had lost New York City. As it turns out, they didn't maybe know this because of the distance of time and travel at this point, but Philly had just been taken while, Saratoga campaign was happening and culminating in victory up here. Our capital had just been taken by General Howe, British general, and his forces. So we were not in a great state at the time. So we tell the story in this video, about 4.5-minute video, of the gravity to just really set up why this was such a big turning point. There are always lots of turning points, in any kind of conflict or even a business or, your life. We all have turning points, but this one was a huge one because of the impacts we talked about before. So we really have to set up and educate and make sure people understand the gravity of the moment. And then that video sort of shifts out of the victory and what it meant immediately to the Revolutionary War, the War for Independence, into how it was commemorated. And that's really instructive and interesting too, and fun to learn. People in the 100th anniversary, were trying to, in a post-Civil War period of strife and division in America, they looked to the founding and to resurrecting some of the knowledge and the awareness and honoring the founding and some of these key victories in the Revolution as a way of healing. So, not saying, there's a direct parallel, but when we're living in times that people feel there's strife and division, sometimes it does help to look at the roots of who we are. And that's one of the things we have an opportunity to do. And again, if you watch that video and share it to friends and family, it really kind of tells the whole story of why the history at the time mattered, how it was commemorated, and why it mattered to generations of people. The 150th anniversary is pretty incredible. 1927, and 100,000+ people came out to rural eastern Saratoga County. No phones, no
internet, right?
No airplanes. Well, there's airplanes, but you get my point. The masses showing up for picnics to watch a commemoration, and hundreds, some odd thousand, and apparently gridlock of, whatever small roadways were there then. That's how much they recognized it mattered in that era. So we have an opportunity, and they were doing things like, in the case of the 150th, they began the building of the monument you referenced. That still stands out there in a beautiful setting. You can still go see it. Check the Saratoga National Historical Park website to see when it's open. It's got limited hours, but you can see it in a beautiful setting over there. That was begun by those people, public and private, to honor this history of the battle. 1920s, that big celebration leads into a bunch of private people raising money to buy the land rights. They were farms during the battle. They were farms all the way up till then, and great example of where preservation works. It's also hallowed ground. It's a burial site still, So they bought rights and started to amalgamate or aggregate, what is now the Saratoga National Historical Park in the 20s. That then led to, the governor then, Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the state of New York, who loved the history and the site, to make it a state park. That then led, when he was president in the 30s, to make it a national park. So these commemorative periods really can spark a lot of creativity, a lot of action that has lasting impact. So for us, we're looking at a digital age where it's maybe the storytelling, the channels we use, the types of stories we tell about people that really can connect and generate that enthusiasm and sharing of knowledge for, like we said, the next 50 years at least. Some lasting things in terms of preservation, that's a third pillar of our objectives, are also going to come out of this. So we can get into that, but it's not going to just be all 21st century social media, video and digital storytelling, or even books. Those are all things we're already underway with, but there will be physical preservation combined with some of that innovative 21st century style, engaging storytelling that we hope to introduce. And we can definitely talk more about it because it's coming. And it will drive people to put their feet in the places of history, but also have access, through their smartphone or whatever else they're carrying with them to see and hear from figures of history, or see in artifacts or landscapes as they may have been, during that era.
I think it's really interesting just because, again, you think you hear Revolutionary War and you're like, oh yeah, I know all about that thing. But there's just so much that you don't know that it's so easy to get excited and interested in what you guys are doing and the way you're bringing that information to the forefront and learning things that you never heard of, you never knew about. Right. There's just so much.
Absolutely.
And it's just been really interesting to kind of go on this journey with you guys a little bit and learn new stuff and see the stories. And
I'm on it with you. 'Cause I'm not, like, make no mistake, I'm not the subject matter expert.
You seem
historian.
very informed.
Well, that may be some of the getting into some of my other background, but I am genuinely interested in it. I definitely have read a fair amount about it, but I'm learning from the incredible network of people that we have around this just as much as anybody else. So that's what probably keeps the enthusiasm up that you may be hearing or sensing. But it is also that civic mindedness that is a big part of it for a lot of us involved. For me, for sure. I won't speak for everybody involved, but I can see it with our team. Like, we really believe in, and have pride in our area and want it to be recognized for this contribution among many other attributes that we have for people having a great place to live and visit. This is, one that really is deep, rooted in a lot of us, and we want more people to know more about it, like you just alluded to.
Well, and it's, kind of to some of the things that you said, I feel like the topics and the things that you're exploring and educating people on with this is so relatable to so many people now. Because like you said, like, there was people on both sides in the same household, and like, we're not in a different situation now with everything that's going on in the world. And you can't, whether it's friends or family or coworkers, like, everyone's got different ideas about what's going on in the world and happening in our country. And it's very similar to, the things that you're talking about and the content that you're bringing together to help people get educated on something that happened almost 250 years ago. And it's still, the lessons can still be learned, or lessons can be learned from looking back at those stories. So
for sure. And I think that's, that's a point for me personally speaking, is like, you benefit by looking across time and space and trying to relate to people through their perspectives. It helps broaden your understanding, and it actually can be instructive to some of the conflicts or divisiveness or issues or challenges we face, whatever they may be, whether it's related to the direction of our country or it's just related to how we conduct ourselves among, our neighbors and family and friends. It's like, why wouldn't we look to the past to benefit from this arc of human history and humankind, to glean the goods and the bad, the positive and the negative, and apply it to the way we attack, our next mission or deal with our daily life. So I think that's, a value of looking back at history. It definitely is striking when you look back without preconceived notions, let's say, at how founders were even analyzing and doing deep dive homework on humankind and nature, to come up with this balanced construct of our Constitution, which followed obviously the Declaration of Independence and winning this war that we're talking about. It led into, however, the same generation of leaders coming out of that big risk of a rebellion, and succeeding only to find, oh, wow, we caught the car. Like, put a 20th century like parlance on it. Oh, we're the dog that caught the car. Now what? Like,
now what?
Well, they did some incredible deep homework on human nature and human history and every form of government known, to come up with essentially a compromise 10 years later, in 1787 with the Constitutional Convention. So, there's a benefit to kind of reassessing when we're in these times, as you kind of referenced, to, hey, let's maybe take a little another look at like why and how did we get to the framework we did?
Yeah.
Because it actually is a way to cope with conflict.
Yeah.
That's how it was designed.
Well, and it's and the framework is something that comes up in everyday life. Almost 250 years later, it is still guiding decision making and policy and regulation and law. I mean, it's completely embedded in everything that we are doing in this country.
Yeah, even you're spot on, and even in a deeper sense, maybe, and you certainly may be alluding to this, but just to draw it out, like that framework even is centered when you look back at what they were studying and thinking, and the philosophers of all time, from the Greeks to Europe and the Scotch and Edmund Burke and others, peers all the way back to the Greeks. And the balance of our Constitution is really sort of a balance of human nature.
Yeah.
There is a natural order and a natural balance to check, other authority or tyrannical type authority, preserve, your inherent right. Again, these are revolutionary in the way they constructed it and thought of it. And now that we still get to stand on it and, prosper and thrive within it for 250 years amid challenges, which certainly had to be opened up for all people. But yeah, that was a framework that was centered in like balance and protecting the individual's rights and consenting to the common good. So it was really a balance between that inherent liberty and that goal that we have. Like you're speaking about some of the civic nature of things I'm involved with. That's how a lot of us like to live our life. Like we are looking for ways to make a positive impact and apply your individual, your God-given rights or abilities in ways that hopefully benefit the greater good.
Yeah.
And that's literally how we're set up. That is how we're founded. That's something to be celebrated. And it stemmed from real risk takers.
Like real risk takers.
Yeah,
like
right.
If they lost, they were going to be put to death.
Absolutely.
Like, there was...
Yes.
They're riding that tiger, so to speak.
Absolutely
There's
right.
No other option for those folks.
That's for sure.
I can't even imagine the amount of guts.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah, they risked everything. And so you're talking about, you have folks from the walk of life of the day that, there was this loyalist versus patriot debate. It's totally understandable, and to apply it in our backyard, you had generations of people here benefiting from trade, right? Down the Hudson River, a great transport corridor from the wilderness of the Adirondacks to a port to go to Europe. So, why would you bail essentially on, that commercial endeavor and opportunity? But it also shows those that were willing to, how far they felt they were pushed. And they were, in their minds, for a good run, part of the English Empire, or some of them, who became some of the most stalwart rebels were Englishmen, including George Washington and others. Like that's how they viewed themselves. So to get pushed to where they were, it showed where the overreach, had really become, unbearable or offensive to make that kind of a choice. Yeah. So you can understand both sides, like why
for sure
it would be very difficult to do. And by the time of 76, let's say, and the actual Declaration of Independence, New York didn't even authorize its representatives or its delegates, on that July 2nd famous vote that's then, released on July 4th, which we celebrate. New York's delegates weren't authorized to vote for independence until days later.
Yeah.
Once it fait accompli in a way. But that's, again, we were in a state that, had a lot of division, and even up here, farther, north, there was, there's estimates out there. I don't know who's our best, but there was a good portion, a third of people in 1775 that were still probably very vocally loyalist, so at minimum.
Yeah, again, it's not dissimilar to what we see today.
For sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
So it's just such an interesting perspective, and to see the same kinds of challenges, just in a little bit different format.
Yeah, well, and the optimistic side is we are the beneficiaries of centuries of humans working within a structure that they helped start, where we could have that dissent without bloodshed.
Yeah.
And that's what all of us are, want to see continue. We want 250 plus more years of, a nation built under this type of, respect for inherent liberties and limited, consent to be governed for the common good applied. And then we can have these kind of discussions.
But still the ability to dissent, if you like.
Exactly.
It's such an important part of it.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
Bill, you touched on it a couple of times, and I feel like we really should just talk a little bit about your background, about what you did before campaign for Saratoga 250.
Sure.
So give us the old resume.
Yeah, oh man, wow. Yeah, I try to put it in context with going way back, and I promise you I'm not going to talk about my childhood.
That's fine.
All the way to today.
We can bring in a couch if you want.
No, but I bring it back because family is very important to me, and I grew up in a small town called Durham, New York, in Greene County, down in the northern Catskills. Super rural, like my farm family, dad's side of the family. We lived right down the hill from an old dairy farm. And it was already in the age of, I was born in 1972. So they'd already auctioned in late 60s. So it's not like I grew up with the dairy right there, but still those values and diligence and hard work in a rural part of the state, that's mostly known for a big giant metro. So, it shaped me. And my mom, her family were innkeepers and entrepreneurs in another part of the county that had, her father had grown up on a boarding house and was running it as an adult. And then he was an electrician and a tradesman. So they bounced around a bit, but they had that, sort of self-determination in both of their roots. But I was raised by them as primarily a teacher, my mother, and a policeman, my father. So I think it was like a really interesting impact on the way I looked at the world, that they, had that kind of grit and self-determination, from their roots and certainly how we lived and looked at the world. But they also applied what they had opportunity to apply to raise my sister and I in a really great, stable, no frills, but nice, fun, positive upbringing as civil servants. So, I think that combination really is what's rooted in the way I ended up, applying whatever, skills I've been blessed to have, to find ways to help deliver value to the greater community, whether it was going right out of college. I went to Binghamton, state school, but went right to Capitol Hill as with no real paid opportunity, after having graduated, with my bachelor's, and fortunate enough to connect and just get in the door with then Congressman Jerry Solomon. And that was really just extraordinarily foundational, right, to my life. That was, something that was just lingering as a kid who was paying attention through his school years. And maybe not a lot of other teenagers were, but I was well aware of what was happening in the world and interested in it. Studied it, and then got that opportunity, and lo and behold ended up being there when Jerry was able to take the rules committee position as the majority traffic cop, if you will, of anything that goes from to the floor of the House. So that's like the mid 90s. I still never know to this day why he and the chief of staff, a great guy named Jeff Gleason, I had been an unpaid intern, then I was barely getting an hourly wage. Just living with a few of my friends, like you have to do when you're like 22 years old and in a big city, an expensive city, much more so now, but still expensive to me then with no money.
Yeah, for sure.
Figuring out how to make your way. And then, they were like, well, we've got these roles where people are moving over to the rules committees, but we still need to staff the district, which is where I was from, here. He ran from Lake Placid to Poughkeepsie, essentially, at that point in that district. And I love that aspect. I didn't want to go work for some random member. I wanted to serve the people that I felt like I, grew up with, and I understood. And so I had that opportunity. They were like, you're going to be the press secretary, like out of nowhere. I'd been there for 3 months. And, I was an intern, and they had this extra role. And the longtime great guy named Dan Amon was going to shift over to the rules committee, like professional staff, in the Capitol building itself, and right off the floor of the House. But I was just looking for a gig, and there was like
a paid one.
Yeah,
right?
A paid one, exactly. And they weren't just giving it out either. I mean, I was sweating it out through Thanksgiving and up almost to Christmas, looking at like 40 some odd random freshmen. Steve Largent, the football Hall of Famer, was one of them, believe it or not. So like his, there was just these mail slots where you went and put your resume. And I was like, doing it, because I wanted to stay and I wanted a job, but half-heartedly because I wanted to work for our area, essentially. And lo and behold, they did offer me a full-time job. So by like January 4th of 1995, I was just like getting press calls as 22 and 6 months year old,
and figuring it out.
Yeah,
right?
figuring it. Yeah, trial by fire. I remember literally saying those, phrases, drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah.
But it was the greatest learning experience. He was still, my most prominent mentor. I worked with him. I took a little stint once he had announced he was retiring, like later 90s from service. And I went to work for a big PR agency at the time. And it, wasn't as motivated. It was all about the billable time, and I understood that. I'm pro-capitalism and, I'm like a pro-commerce guy. I know how that helps families and helps growth. You got to eat. But I was like not passionate about it. And lo and behold, Jerry called back and like, hey, I'm setting up a firm. So you got out there and got trained in like consulting a little bit. You want to come back with me? And I was like, yeah. So yeah, that was fun. But he passed sadly in October 2001. So, that fall was September 11th. And like 6 weeks later, he passed. He had been ill. So that was my early professional career. And then it was like, wow, now what? Like I'm still a pretty young guy, but I'm married happily and still married to Kim. But just started thinking about ways to continue to do work for people at home, even though I was living in DC, obviously at that point. And so I'd represented small nonprofits, dairy co-ops for like the next 4 or 5 years before we finally moved up here to Saratoga Springs in 2006. But post 9/11 essentially, and then his passing, not wanting to be serving a general district of some other senator or congressman, it just all subconsciously was drawing me back here and wanting to apply whatever it is that I had learned to the area that I wanted to make home. And my wife's an upstate Western New Yorker, Buffalo proud, area.
Oh, sure.
I've met so many people even before meeting Kim, but they really are incredible people. So many of all kinds of areas of New York are just so proud of where they're from. So I love that. And she loved Saratoga. So that was the deal. And we had 2 and a 4-year-old by then. So we got up here in 2006 and raised them here. We were remote working before it was cool. I don't know if it's cool ever, but we were doing it from like 2006. I mean,
it's very cool now. Right?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Like once the pandemic rolled around 2020, we're like, this is old hat.
We've been doing this.
I moved up here because I could take Southwest to DC in 50 minutes and I had a BlackBerry. That's what it was back then. I was like, I don't need to live in the Beltway. Let's live where we, have an incredible quality of life and seasons and, great place to raise our kids. So that was really paramount. But the things I did while we were here professionally were, to your point, almost always centered around some sort of combination of public benefit to a commercial good. So, like I said, everything from having helped try to represent nonprofits or dairy farmers, with public policy in DC, to once I was living here full time, it was more transitioning into, okay, how can we help somebody or an organization tell their story and the benefit to the public better so that they have more opportunities to serve and benefit the public. So, I pretty much a marketing communication strategist for the most part. I started to get involved with affordable housing. Again, knowing that I don't hold any ill will towards people that take risk and make money. That is part of it, and that deliver a value. And I also saw, however, living in an environment like we've had, that, there is a workforce and a working class need to serve at hospitals, teach in schools, protect the public as public safety officers. So again, that's why I went back to my original childhood.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuck with me. So I knew the tools that were available to try and spark what I think is a balanced approach to offering rents that folks like that could afford, or early households, maybe with small kids or pre-kids could afford while they were working in hospitality. So I started getting involved in a couple of projects, not just in Saratoga Springs. The ones that we were involved with and we got approved here could never quite make the cut for these big tax credits that get awarded through the government to get off the ground, but I do think we helped paint the picture of why and how you can achieve this. And it certainly led to like half dozen or more other developers in Saratoga Springs, successfully building projects, hopefully serving, households and stabilizing them or helping them, make the next leap.
Yeah.
But I did successfully with some partners that went from out of state, because it's a very, cottage business in terms of knowing how to put the capital together to do these deals. We did one in Buffalo, in a reuse of an old factory, which is common in a lot of these mill towns and parts of a city like Buffalo, and in Utica. So we ended up getting 2 pretty big deals done, and tried a couple of other ones, gave it the old college try, worked hard, and they didn't pan out, but that taught me a lot about entrepreneurs and genuine risk takers.
Yeah.
So I respect them immensely, and the value they bring to community. But yeah, I was always looking at ways to like more or less apply that balance of the, that inherent freedom to pursue, a business or be an entrepreneur and take some risks with what's the public benefit.
Yeah, with doing good while making money.
Totally.
It's hard to do.
It is.
I mean, I know like for us as a company, I mean, we work with very small businesses and we try to do it as affordable as possible.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like you still have to make money to keep the machine going so you can help more people, right? So it's always that balance of, like we don't work with $100 million companies. I mean, we would.
Yeah.
But like most of our clients don't have that kind of budget. So it's like, all right, what can we do that's going to be impactful?
Yeah.
It's going to help them on their path. And it's hard.
That's what it was, drew me to when we met too.
Yeah.
I mean, you can sort of tell people who are genuinely trying to do that. And, it's a decision to attempt it, right? Because you're foregoing margins which is great when you have cause-based missions. So that's sort of a decision I made, intentionally or not. Like it's where I ended up.
Yeah.
And that's why I went back into that a little bit about who I am from the root, because I think it's always been in the subconscious that, maybe I wasn't, I grew out of the Beltway because I didn't like the intersection of the moneyed interest and the common good, and I wanted to be back closer to the community where you could effectuate maybe solutions and still pay your bills. And like we've said, there's nothing wrong with that, but I wanted to make sure there was a way that it's beneficial to others as well, as wherever possible. So it's just sort of ingrained. But I think even back to that discussion we just had about our framing or the Constitution, I mean, that's really what it was trying to set up and protect.
Yeah, it wasn't so those guys could be wealthy.
No, and it was also so that you could be empowered, at your individual level, which doesn't mean it's only the self-interest moneyed level. It means it's the things that drive your life every day to hit the floor. I want to take care of my family. And then maybe by extension, I want to make sure they're educated well, or I want to make sure there's opportunities to serve a need in my community, and then it blossoms. Yeah. It starts with your roots.
Those freedoms really do open up the ability to do things.
Exactly.
Right? Like I had Bill Tansey from the OmpX shop. I don't know if you know Bill or not.
I know the name. I don't know him.
So Bill's a great guy, personal friend. I have a very high amount of respect for what he does for businesses. But we were having a conversation about why we see so much ingenuity and innovation in the United States. And we were just talking about, it's like, well, what do they say? Like China's really good about like remaking things, but they're not really good at the innovation side.
I've heard that.
And it's just because they don't have the freedoms that we have. And those freedoms open up such a huge world of opportunity and idea and having the ability to be wrong without that real severe consequence, right? To have dissent and to disagree without death, right? Like it really does open up the ability to fail forward and make mistakes and become better and innovate. Whereas with countries that don't have what we have, you don't have it. And so you're not going to see the innovation. It's just not possible. The environment is too controlled. It's too fearful. And you won't see risk takers that are needed to be able to do those things.
Yeah. So it's true. I mean, that's by design, but really it's almost by natural order design that our founders appreciated and looked into. Honestly, they did our homework. and looked at all the failures and failed
Well, yeah,
through the Articles of Confederation period. It
Yeah.
wasn't good enough. And
Yeah.
they had to really redouble their efforts. So it does allow these opportunities to blossom, and that's what is worth reminding people, about the stories where you can learn from that history, because it does have direct impact on your life.
Yeah.
It is what enables the marketplace of ideas to have dissent, if it's about policy side of the house, or to pursue and fail. And that was something, just kind of a perfectionist streak in me. I was always, worried about getting something wrong. And that took a lot of evolution through life, and some of these entrepreneurial endeavors that I spent a lot of time and energy on that were all on the come, as they say, right?
Yeah.
But you learn a lot
Yeah.
about how difficult it is to create value that is realized in the marketplace and
Yeah.
rewarded. So, you actually absolutely, everybody should try it. So it's almost like in a nation that's founded with that kind of liberty, that's almost something that's inherent in us. But it could be even more so. Like if you just challenge children to come up with a way to solve a problem for their friends in the lunchroom, everybody would naturally even be more inclined to think about, well, yeah, if we had this or that solution, it might be a little more appealing or a little better service or a little, that's it, even though we don't maybe teach it intentionally, it is still just so imbued and based on the system that we've been
in our
fortunate
culture.
to live under. In our culture.
Yeah.
It's fun. So, flashing forward to this mission, it was a really incredibly appealing and natural opportunity, because I love this. I love our history. I love trying to reconnect it to, more and more people. I love the support we had right off the bat from our founding donors, from our county leadership. And, we're always looking for more. It's really takes grassroots effort to do the things that we really intend to do. To have one of the biggest commemorations out of this whole 250th in the country. That is a genuine goal, from the mission set for us by the folks I was just talking about, from some of our public and private partners. They're why wouldn't Saratoga have the biggest, the best reenactment, in 2027? And we have an incredible living history network of people that are going to make that happen. They're going to these events all the way on the run up. So we do get the benefit of kind of learning, talking about entrepreneurism, right?
Yeah.
A lot of time it's studying other things and figuring out how to do better. And people are doing incredible things so far with the 250th, but we're present and just taking notes, trying to figure out how to make sure we do as good a job as possible up here and make it accessible and available to as many people as are willing. So we have big goals of thousands of reenactors, doing full scale battle reenactments in October 2027 on Columbus Day weekend. And, there'll be events out east part of Saratoga County near the battlefield. There'll be events with, other living historians, maybe portraying civilian encampments alongside the military encampments. There'll be ideally partners in the hospitality network, that will be inspired to do things like we see in other festive times of year up here, whether it's track season or any other. Like hopefully there'll be folks, serving 18th century themed menus and Burgoyne burger, or Turning Point Ale. Yeah, and some living historians portraying 18th century people in taverns, and all of those things are on the roadmap.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, it would be fun.
That'd be fun.
We want to make it a fun experience.
Yeah. I know that, I know we're getting short on time, but there was a couple other things I think that you mentioned too, or you started to mention, as far as the integration in real life and technology. Yes. Can you kind of just give us a rundown on that?
Yeah, thank you for that. So essentially, we're building augmented reality platforms, and we've been demonstrating it with just some fun things like coasters that are at some of our partners, like Old Bryan Inn and Cooperstown Distilling's Exchange on Broadway in Saratoga Springs. And, we'd love to have them in more places that launch 4 figures of history with randomized toasts, while you're sitting around, having a cocktail or a drink or your non-alcoholic beverage of choice. You can launch on your smartphone and hear Benedict Arnold or the Baroness I talked about, or General Burgoyne, who, traveled with Crystal and champagne when he ended up being defeated here. You hear them raising a glass, huzzah toast. So we're demonstrating some of that early on, intentionally to try and, work it out, the technology and the caliber of the content that we are producing so that it can be ultimately built out to be made available at heritage sites and historic sites of the Revolution, that we will then take that storytelling, bundle it into a travel destination guide and an app with the GPS navigation that we all rely on nowadays, and sort of set your own course to go to. Initially, we're planning for like 10 to 12 sites that we will apply that navigation and storytelling, and then build out over time the augmented reality experience that would just be activated on your smartphone from a legacy interpretive sign, the ubiquitous QR codes we've all been accustomed to to launch it, but it'll be, that kind of experience. So you have to put your feet in the place of history. You get a feeling, you get a sensibility, that's important. But we want to also augment it literally with 3D, audio visual experience that, again, a lot of the youngest generations are going to be, they're born with it. They're accustomed to it. They don't necessarily just want to read a sign. They want to experience something deeper. That's why we're developing that. And I'll put a little bit of a finer point. So a digital presence will include like guides for if you're here for a half day, or you're here with kids, or you're here, with young adults and you want like a wellness walk, but with some history sprinkled in. We'll build out guides on what's going to be called the Saratoga Revolutionary Experience. So think of it like a one-stop hospitality sort of a platform where you can look at those guides, access this travel app, which will have the actual storytelling, and point you to 10 or 12 sites, some of which are not as well known, but really important and really beautiful settings that we absolutely want to highlight because they're tied to the Revolutionary era. And then there'll be a physical hub out in Schuylerville. And again, this is just incredible credit to Saratoga County and the leadership's vision for what, the Revolutionary heritage here really means and can be. So they've long-term leased a building already in collaboration with an existing nonprofit that has a beautiful building and a beautiful Champlain Canal era heritage center there right now. So if you look up Champlain Canal Region Gateway Visitor Center, it's right in the heart of downtown Schuylerville, essentially on Ferry Street 29. And they have a beautiful main floor with exhibits of that era, and the whole lower level that the county's, again, effort in this respect is going to bring stability to that whole property. That will be fit up as a Saratoga Revolutionary Experience physical hub. So we'll have the digital and the physical combined, and think of that as like almost an orientation experience where inside that space can be digital exhibits and interpretations, and you can rotate those obviously. So it's not like it's meant to be a collection of artifacts, although we'd love to have some on loan down the line, let's say, but it's meant to be a place where you can kind of get oriented around this whole Saratoga campaign, because there's offshoots all the way from Montreal down that were incredibly important. Obviously, the fall back to the British of Fort Ticonderoga, and that's an amazing, incredible like worldwide asset up there, on down to like battles like the Battle of Hubbardton, Battle of Bennington, which, some folks, including the Dake family, which are great supporters of ours, like to call the turning point of the turning point, because that skirmish, was a victory, if you will, for the Americans, and, helped kind of, chased away some of the native allies in a way of Burgoyne, and, further weakened his forces. And he was trying to help, find other arms in his supply chain, and it was a failure. So anyway, that we're going to tie together a lot of these other regional nodes and then be able to send people to a place in the middle of a walkable downtown community. That location sits right at Fort Hardy Park, which is incredibly important. That's literally the field of grounded arms. There's already a beautiful federal surrender site on the National Park Service manages, like a couple miles south of this location, where the sword surrender of the officers Burgoyne to General Gates happened. That's an amazing asset in itself. But Fort Hardy Park is a municipal park right on the Hudson River, but it is where the British regulars marched between American forces singing Yankee Doodle Dandy and laid down their arms literally, and became those prisoners of war. Right there, this Champlain Canal Gateway Region Visitor Center sits right at it. So right off the bat, where we're going to try and direct people for a bit of a physical orientation around this region-wide conflict, the Northern Campaign of 1777, and then how it applies right in Saratoga and Stillwater, will be sitting right next to where the actual ultimate, laying down of arms happened. So that's the combo of the Saratoga Revolutionary Experience that's coming. We'll start having that online guide available. This victory season is what we call September and October every year.
Yeah.
That's when the battles occurred. September 19th was the first battle. October 7th, the second battle. Surrender Day is October 17th. So it's a naturally great time to be up here and to visit, or to go out on your own if you live here. But we'll have the Saratoga Revolutionary Experience available online as like a travel guide by then. We'll have elements of this online travel app experience. Maybe only one of the sites where we'll have an augmented reality experience, because that is pretty expensive to produce.
Yeah, I bet.
So we can use support, but we're going to have a narrated, fun storytelling that, imagine it like your podcasts. While you're driving there, you could be hearing from, actual figures from history in like a British voice or an American from that era talking about their role, where you're headed. So that's the thing that we'll start with. And then that will give us the infrastructure to layer in more augmented reality stories all the way, for years. Obviously, by 2027, we want to have a good robust group of them.
Yeah. It sounds like geocaching meets like Pokemon Go meets the Revolutionary War.
That's a good way to put it, honestly. And things like gamification are on the drawing board, on the roadmap. We definitely want that, again, that tier 1A audience with the family with kids to go do that.
Make an activity, something you can go and do.
Absolutely. And the last thing I'll say about what's really coming up right this fall is every year on Indigenous Day and Columbus Day weekend, we've been doing the Siege weekend out in that vicinity in Schuylerville in partnership with the Saratoga National Historic Park. We've been having living historians, at the park sites down right around Fort Hardy Park. So we've been scaling, if you will, year to year that long weekend. So when you're out apple picking, there's this whole other node of history you can take in. It's fun. There's cannon firing, a blacksmith with a live old forge, musket firing, marching in formation with, living historians. So that happens every October. And then we have this year a unique 250th in our own backyard, the Henry Knox Noble Train of Artillery's actual 250th commemoration is this year, starting in December. But we're going to have a whole series across the counties, all the way from Fort Ticonderoga down the Hudson River corridor, so Warren, Washington to Saratoga County, on to Albany and Rensselaer County, and then it heads all the way out to Boston, because that incredible feat was hauling 59 artillery pieces out of Fort Ticonderoga all the way to Dorchester Heights overlooking Boston Harbor by March of the following year, 1776. Which directly led to British Evacuation Day, that's still celebrated along with St. Patrick's Day. On March 17th, 1776, the British pulled up anchor and pulled out of Boston Harbor because of largely artillery pieces that Henry Knox and incredible team brought through the wilderness, through the dead of winter. Imagine the Adirondacks and down the Hudson corridor, crossing the Hudson River.
Oh, I don't have to imagine.
Going over the Berkshires. Yeah, but like going over the Berkshires on top of coming out of the Adirondacks, all in the dead of winter.
Wild.
With Teamsters and,
cold and snow and
so
none of the technology we have now.
Correct. So that commemoration is going on all across those counties that we're partnered with, multiple states. And the cool thing is, we have commissioned a replica authentic cannon of the era that has been out and about being fired, at a lot of our events, but it will be brought all the way along that, essentially like a torch relay, passed off from community to community all the way to Boston. And then an incredible cool story, which again, this video is great on our at Saratoga 250 YouTube. BOCES students in conservation, so out in the woodlands, went and harvested timber. And then BOCES students in the Myers Center in Saratoga Springs in the carpentry unit milled from that lumber that was milled. They made replica sleds that had been used in that Knox Noble train of artillery to drag these cannons.
Oh, wow.
Cannons. So they made 2 of them that are going to be part of this procession. And then the New York State History Museum, heard of this, and they're going to curate and display those as part of their updated Revolutionary era, New York Revolutionary exhibits. So students in our backyard, harvested wood, milled it, got it over to students who did, intentionally, all hand tools, put these together, and they'll all be part of this celebration. So it's another example of how can we be more intentional and meaningful in the way we engage with other community audiences and make them part of history. So they're excited because, something they built is going to be on display and taken across multiple states. And, 10, 20, 30 years, they may be bringing their kids and their grandkids to see work they did, in this commemorative period. So that's kind of the spirit of
that's
what
really
we're doing.
cool.
Yeah.
If people want to learn more about the campaign for Saratoga 250, where do they find you guys?
Saratoga250.com is a great website. It's got a lot of incredible resources. All these videos are accessible there that I've been talking about. Events. There are events all over the place this summer and into victory season of the fall and right into this Knox 250th commemoration. Stay part of our mailing list. You can sign up right there. We do not spam people. It's a once a week, just routine way to stay in touch with the history or the events. Some of them are, like, did you know, kind of interesting facts like we were just talking about. Some of them are just alerts to the events that we've got and others in the region have. And then on most social channels, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, professionals, we're even on LinkedIn,
Very nice.
Always looking for more volunteers, more donors, more support. So reach out through Saratoga250.com.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming out to the farm.
Yeah, it's so
Appreciate
fun.
it.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I love it. And it's only just getting a little hot.
It's just started. I feel like I saw you start to glisten a little bit.
I am a little bit. That's funny.
Hopefully the AC will be working again. I'm sure it will be. So thanks again to the folks over at Sarone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for coming out. Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks, of course, to not just Sarone, but all of our community partners. Appreciate you making this podcast and a lot of what we do at Buying Local happen. We can't do it without your support. So thank you so much. And if you're listening, you can, or if you're not listening or you want to listen, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, and Apple Podcasts. Everywhere, pretty much everywhere you get podcasts, guys. So thanks everybody for listening, and you'll hear from us next week.